So therefore, we talk about, again, selflessness. And it's something that's very hard. In this example that I gave you, for some of you, it was easy to see that kindness is not always a healthy thing. But really, to have a healthy relationship, you have to be selfless. But it doesn't mean you don't have a sense of self. On the contrary, if you lose your sense of self, you're not really having a healthy relationship. It's actually a lopsided relationship. You're actually going to be abused in that relationship. So that's not called selflessness, because selflessness means, by definition, it's not so much about the negation of self, it's more about the consideration of others. And so therefore, just negation of self is, as I said earlier, a shmata, is a rag, is being abused, is being taken advantage of. But consideration of the other, being able to think about the other, what the other needs, and what's happening in the other person's life, that's selflessness. There's a famous anecdote that's quoted. There were two Hasidic Rebbes, Reb Zusha of Anapoli, and he had a brother, Reb Shmelke. Very great people. And they used to travel around Russia, Ukraine, encouraging people, uplifting people, but also for themselves, just as much as you teach, you also learn. And they said they one time came to a tavern. In Yiddish, it's called a kretschma. I don't know if you're familiar with the word. They came to a tavern somewhere in far-fetched Russia somewhere. And they said that in that tavern, they learned the true meaning of love. What happened? They're sitting on the sidelines.
They met the Baal Shem Tov.
No. Listen. They were They were 2 generations after the Baal Shem Tov. They were actually students of the Baal Shem Tov. But it's good that you were listening yesterday. Good. There are 2 Russian peasants sitting, both dead drunk in Russia. And one tells the other, Ivan, I love you. I love you. I love you. The other guy says, no, you don't. He says, I love you. No, you don't. And they're going back until they're getting all upset. And finally, the second guy says, if you really love me, tell me what's bothering me at this moment. Conversation ended. And they said that's when they learned the real meaning of love, is when you really can feel what's happening in the other, when you can detect without being told what's happening in the other person's life, good or bad. So you celebrate their happiness because it becomes their joy is your joy, their pain is your pain. So that is selflessness. That's the ability to see beyond the self, the ability to go beyond the self, the ability to really be focused on the other. And that's what bitul is. That's what bitul is, and that's what the key ingredient to everything else we'll talk about. That you can talk about relationships, trust, and whatever you're going to say about it is ultimately the ability to accept the other, and therefore the ability to be accepted by the other is really when we stop focusing on the self. So we start a relationship, we have to start it with the self. What do I have in common with the other person? What's in? But that's the beginning of a relationship. The ultimate goal of the relationship is to go beyond that, to really have an unconditional relationship, a commitment. And therefore, really for a real healthy relationship, commitment is what's important, not love. When you have commitment, you'll have love. But if you have love, you won't necessarily have commitment. And that's why we see the rate of divorce, right? In our society, there's a lot of love, so to speak. Maybe you'll call it lust, not love. I'm not sure what you call it. But it's the same concept. It's self-focused, okay? How it makes me feel. Commitment is we're dedicated to something greater than how it makes me feel. So that's what we spoke about the first week. Again, that's one of the ideas we spoke about the first week. That's the main point I want to bring back. And then the second week we spoke about one idea that we focused on is what happens when there's a breakdown in the relationship. So using, again, this ingredient of commitment, so the instinctive reaction when there's a breakdown in the relationship is that each party sort of turns back to back, turns away from each other. And actually to bring back the relationship, again, assuming that there's commitment in the relationship. If there's no commitment in the relationship, it's not going to work, obviously. You can't begin commitment when things are not going healthy, when things are not going good. But assuming that there was commitment in the relationship, one of the ways to bring back the feeling and the relationship and the harmony and so on is to do things without feelings. You have no feelings that are negative. Just do something for the other person. And what's motivating you is the commitment. And then you'll find when you begin to just do things, as we call them in scriptural terms, empty vessels. They're just vessels that have no feeling, no passion, no drive, but the fact that I'm committed to this person and committed to this relationship, that will then reawaken the passion. That will then bring people back together. And there's many, even in modern psychology, there's many books written about this, but this idea is really, we spoke about this as a homiletic interpretation of one of the scriptural stories. Okay, so what I want to talk about really today is a third thing. Maybe it's not a third, but it's a third angle, if you want to call it, to relationships. So what we spoke about, and I just want to bring one more point, is that we're going to use, and we've used, the model of human relationship with God for interpersonal relationships. So usually it's the other way around. We use human metaphors to understand a little bit about God, but actually what we're going to do in relationships is actually use a relationship with God and then model that as a model for human relationships. And the reason for that is that we've established the basis for that. The reason for that is because we're made in the divine image, which means that everything that happens on a human level is really a reflection of really what's happening on a divine level. And so it gives us a deeper insight of human relationships. And one point, and with this I'll move on to today, that just highlights is that relationships really is a paradox. Because on one hand, a human being, and maybe it applies to everybody, but Maimonides speaks about the human being, is really a social being, which means we have a need for relationships, right? We spoke about this also in the past, that the deepest pain a person could experience is really, what do you think it would be? Isolation, loneliness. That is the deepest pain that a human being can suffer, right? Rejection, alone, and so on. There's obviously different experiences and different ways people experience, but ultimately that's the most painful experience for a human being. And so how we deal with that, okay, there are many ways to deal with that, and sometimes it becomes so ingrained, the negative ways of dealing with it, the unhealthy ways, that we do need professional help to really undo all that. But ultimately, it all started with wanting a relationship, wanting to be accepted, wanting to be acknowledged. And so on one hand, we crave relationships. And on the other hand, if you think about it, all problems in life can be boiled down to relationships, right? So it's really this tug of war that we encounter. We want it, and we because that's really the nature of relationships. It's really this paradox. And what we've spoken about, where did it all start? Why do we have this need, this innate need for relationships? Because we really model God. Okay, so if we go back, and I'll just say one word about this, we go back to creation. What is the metaphor in Scripture for the tools that God used to create the world? What was the words, right? God spoke. Chapter 1 in Genesis is about the 10 different utterances that God said, let there be, and there was, right? What is this metaphor of words? God obviously doesn't have a mouth. So what does it mean? What's this idea? And God spoke, right? Why do you have to use even in the metaphor? Just, it could have said it. God wanted there should be, and it was. I mean, what do you have to use this metaphor of words? So I'm not going to go through the whole lengthy discussion about it, but one point is that the definition of speech is really communication, which means the faculty of speech that we uniquely human possess is the ability to communicate, which means not animals also communicate, but without speech. What's the difference between communication without speech and communication with speech? That there's communication for survival. That's animal communication. But then there's communication because I don't need it for survival. I can use other forms of communication. It's really about conveying a message to the other. So really, communication in its highest form is really the selfless capacity that human beings possess. The ability to give to somebody else. There's nothing that I don't need speech for myself. I mean, people that sit and talk to themselves all day, that's a problem, right? Some people do that. That's fine. But it's not really for yourself. It's really about, you know what you want, you know what you feel, it's really about letting go and giving to the other. And so really creation, the objective of creation, why did God create the world, right? That's the ultimate question. Why are we here? What's the purpose and so on, is really about creating a sense of the other, right? So before God created the world, God is monotheism. Monotheism is not just there's one God, but one reality. And that's true even today after creation. But before creation, that reality, that oneness of God was self-apparent. There was only God. God created the world. He gave us a sense of independence. He concealed his truth. He concealed his oneness, and therefore we feel independent. Why did he do that? That afforded us the opportunity of free choice, right? So if we would feel that we're all part of the divine, and we would be doing everything perfect and positive, naturally, we would be like an angel, right? But human beings are not angels, right? For the good and for the bad. Why? Because God gave us free choice. So creation, by definition, created a sense of the other. But what's the purpose of free choice? That we should make the wrong choices. The purpose of free choice is that we should make the right choices on our own. We should own it, right? But you understand that when you give somebody free choice, you take a gamble. They can make the wrong choices. That's the definition. You give a child independence, they could make the wrong choices. But you're giving them the opportunity because of the benefit that comes when they end up making the right choices. So that's what a relationship really is. That's where relationship starts. You're creating the other. You're giving them free choice. They're an independent being. They're an individual. They have their own. What you want is for them to come and recognize the truth, come back together to that truth, come back to God. But it comes with a price. There's going to be failure along the way, which is okay. That's the flip side of independence. That's the flip side of individuality. So that's why we go back, sort of the failed success of relationships is really reflective of the failed success of life in general, the ups and downs of life in general. We sometimes get discouraged by the failures. The trick of life is to get up and move on, to get up and learn from it, to get up and grow from it. When you get stuck in it, that's the problem. And the same as in relationships. Differences actually beautify a relationship. Individuality actually enhances a relationship. Do they cause friction at times? Absolutely. But are you going to get stuck in the friction? You're going to forget why you were given independence? Or are you going to learn from it? You're going to understand there's a price for that, which is sometimes they're going to be breakdowns. But the beauty is when you get up and you learn from it and you grow from it, and then the relationship actually becomes deeper. And in a relationship with God, it's the same way. Now we're entering into the month before Rosh Hashanah, it's the same idea. We think of sin as only negative. Okay, so you can repent and God can forgive you, but you want to forget about it, right? Actually, in Judaism, sin, once you repent, becomes a cause for actually a deeper relationship. And they use a very physical metaphor to understand this. Think of a string or a rope, right? So we're at one end of the rope, God's at the other end of the rope, right? We're connected. What happens when you cut the string? You're severed now, right? So there's no, you pull one way, God pulls the other way. You're not together anymore. But when you rectify the rip, how do you rectify that rip? You tie a knot. What happens when you tie a knot? Both ends get closer to each other.
Very nice.
So that and the same should be true in every relationship. Okay, so now what I want to move is to a little bit for today what we're going to focus on, and that is in order to better understand the ingredients, the methods, the important, whatever you want to call it, and also to avoid pitfalls and so on of a relationship, we need to first define what's the objective of relationships. And once we define the objective of relationships, then we can actually go backwards and then see match it against that objective and use the objective as the criteria of what's proper, how to get there, and what's not, and so on. So what would you define as the objective as relate? I'm not looking for something abstract, and it's it's a very simple, straightforward. What would be the objective of relationships?
Comfort,
Comfort, guidance,
help each other achieve their
Companionship.
their goals.
companionship,
Sharing,
sharing,
empathic with one another.
to be
Empathic with one another.
empathic of one another. Okay. Anybody? Anything else?
Love,
Huh?
friendship.
Okay. So then what's the
Yeah,
objective of friendship? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to use a different term.
Balance.
Balance of what?
Well,
One balances the other.
Okay.
One complements the other. Yeah, there's a feeling of more complete. You're in the right relationship.
Okay. I want to use a different term. Yeah.
Mutual support.
Okay. I'm not going to now analyze what each one said and what the faults of each one is. But what I do want to say, but what I do want to say is because I mean, by now we should have known what the faults of many of what we said is, which is if the objective of a relationship is selfless, think now, I'm not going to spell out, think now, is it about self or is it about the other? But what I do want to use is more generic term. But I'm saying generic, but really I think that relationship, really, the objective is to get to a sense of unity. That's really what it is, right? I mean, now, all these things that you mentioned, again, without looking, is it faulty? And that's not important. All these things are all, why do I want unity? How do I get to the unity? But really, what is a relationship? A relationship, by definition, means coming together, right? Unity. So really, if the objective is unity, we need to examine what is unity. Because if we don't know what unity is, we don't know what we want, right? So what I want to propose today, based on, again, the Judaic teaching, is that there's actually three types or three layers of unity, okay? And we need all three. Sometimes in stages. To get to two, you first have to pass one, but really we also need them simultaneously because each one has an advantage, a disadvantage, and so on. And I want to use a model of one of the Jewish holidays. Okay, so one of the Jewish holidays, the less familiar of the Jewish holiday, the most familiar is Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. A Passover would be today. Hanukkah is right, but from the less familiar ones is Sukkot. Okay, why is it the less familiar? I don't know. Maybe it's after the high holidays already. People are already exhausted, and whatever the reason should be. But it's actually, if you have to define, I'll explain in a minute what Sukkot is. Actually, if you had to define what is the objective of each holiday, the objective of the holiday of Sukkot in all its different practices is unity. It's a holiday to celebrate and inculcate a sense of unity.
You better give them a better definition right off the bat.
What?
It's the harvest.
Well, hold on a second. I'm going to say.
All right, but I don't want them in the dark for too long. It's not fair.
I want to tell you something. It's an unfortunate reality that Christians know more about Scripture than Jews.
They do. Different
No, we're the same. But anyway, so I'll spell it. This is clearly in Leviticus and Numbers. 5 days after Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur, we go by the lunar calendar. Different than the way the Muslims go by the lunar calendar, because they just go 12 months. We each try to readjust it with the solar calendar. But generally speaking, it's around September time, give or take, right? So Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the month of Tishrei. 10 days later is Yom Kippur, the day that we fast, the holiest day. 5 days later begins a holiday of 8-9 days. Depends on Israel or diaspora, 8-9 days. What is this holiday? It's called Sukkot. What does Sukkot mean? Sukkot really means a temporary hut, a temporary dwelling place. And what you're supposed to do is for 7 days, you're supposed to live, not in the house, but in this hut that you create. You cover it with leaves. You're sort of living out in nature. And what it is really is to remember the 40 years between the Exodus and coming to the land of Israel. They traveled, they journeyed through the desert. They were surrounded by these clouds that protected them from the elements. And so to really thank God for that, we also go out again to the elements. We surround ourselves with this surrounding. And this is a way that we sort of thank God for that miracle. There's also what you said, the festival of the harvest, which is also that's also incorporated into this. But there are three really mitzvot that are unique to this holiday. One is sitting in the huts, right? The other is that you take four species of different vegetation, which we'll talk about in a second, and you collect them together and you make a blessing and you shake them every day in the morning at prayers. What's the objective? We'll soon see. One is because it's the harvest. You want to thank God for the different things that grow. And so you're thanking God with that sort of, but we'll soon see that doesn't fully explain it. And then the third unique thing to this holiday is that although every holiday is called in Hebrew Moadim L'Simcha, holidays of joy, every holiday is supposed to be joyous, but this holiday specifically is called the holiday of joy, which means in prayers, when we pray, we say for each holiday, what's the holiday celebrate? So Passover, you call it the time of freedom, right? It was the time of the Exodus. On the next holiday, also not as common, Shavuot, which we celebrate the revelation at Sinai, the receiving of the Torah. It's called the time of Matan Toratenu, the day that we received the Torah, right? What do we say when we celebrate Sukkot? We say it's the time, Zman Simchatenu, the time of joy. And actually, in temple times, there were unique celebrations every night. For a whole week, they would celebrate, dance and juggle and all different forms of joyous events, of festivities and so on, that happened in the temple for 7 days straight. And we culminated with Simchat Torah, which is the most joyous holiday. We dance with the Torah in the temple and so on. We say a lot of l'chaim, whatever. So what is the connection between these three concepts of sitting in the hut, the four species, as I'll talk about in a second, and joy? All three of these really are all about unity, but each one is a different layer or a different type of unity. Okay, so generally speaking, we'll divide it into two categories. There is a unity that we experience, a unity beyond details, a unity beyond individuality, a oneness beyond the pluralism of our experience. Which means, in other words, just to give you a very simple example, the easiest way to understand this is when people get together and let's not talk about our differences. Right?
Let's not talk about.
Let's not talk about our differences. Right? I'm not going to get into politics. I never talk politics here, but everybody knows that in the last decade, I'm just broadening it, Thanksgiving celebrations in many American homes have suffered, and there's a lot of fear in anticipating, right? And so what you'll do is you'll usually send out an invitation and say, no talking about these topics, no talking about those topics, right? If we can actually uphold these things. But in other words, I love you, but without your differences. So in other words, we can come together as friends, as families, as colleagues, but we have to ignore our differences. Now, we might say that's a very shallow relationship, right? And it seems to be, but actually, it could actually be a very deep relationship as well. It doesn't have to, I'm giving you a negative example, of course, but it could also actually be a very deep relationship if you think about it. And just to use an example for that is, let's say you're driving down the highway, and again, it doesn't make a difference the example, but just you're driving down the highway, you see somebody stuck on the road. You see, God forbid, an accident. You see somebody fall on, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. What are you going to do? Immediately, you're going to jump in and try to help if you could, right? As soon as, obviously, you're not putting yourself in danger, but you're going to jump right away. You're going to, what motivates you to help that person?
Kindness.
No. Before we get to the kind, even if you're not such a kind person, it's the humanity, right? It's the human. You see a human being, you see their humanity, and that's all you see. You don't say, hey, 1 second, before I help you up, who did you vote for? Right? It's irrelevant. And there's certain times in human relationships that it's irrelevant, your political standing, your social standing, your financial standing, your religious standing. It's what do we see in the other person? We see them as a human being, If you want to speak on a spiritual level, you see their soul, see the divine spark within them. That's what you see. So is that called a shallow relationship? At that point, when it's a very deep relationship, right? So a unity beyond the individuality, beyond the divisiveness of people, if you want to call that, it could be shallow, but it can actually be a very positive, very healthy, and a very deep relationship, right? Now, the advantage of this kind of unity is that you don't have to really work on creating a connection with the other person. We have it naturally, right? So if you're able to see the other person as a human being, you're able to see them as a, focus on their soul, as a not the body part, not the, so then you naturally have a relationship with that person. You don't have to create the relationship. So it's something it's very deep and it's immediate. And if you want to say it's even unconditional, right? But there's a downside to that. And that the limitation of this type of unity is that it doesn't incorporate our differences. And so the moment we start speaking about our differences, then all of a sudden the relationship could break down. So therefore, it's not enough to have a unity that's beyond the differences. We need to move on to the second type of unity, which is a unity that embraces our differences. Okay. Now, if we have two people that pretty much see eye to eye, you think of a marital relationship, okay, and you think to yourself, wow, they have a beautiful relationship. They never disagree. They agree, which is beautiful. I'm not trying to inject divisiveness into that relationship because I'm looking for work then to repair it, right? But really, it's beautiful because they happen to see eye to eye in everything. Each one is really a mirror of the other person. But that's not a harmonious relationship. A harmonious relationship is when you have differences. Yeah, each one has something different, that they complement each other, that they contribute to each other, that each one needs the other because I don't have those strengths, and so on. And that's really the beauty of a relationship. It's easier to fall back and have a relationship with those people that you're identical with. It's much easier to have that kind of relationship. But that's the first kind of unity, is we have things in common where either we won't focus on the differences or we really have no differences. What's the joke about? Yes, dear. Yeah, I forgot the joke. Huh? That always have the last word. Yes, dear. Right. That was so. You know what I'm talking about?
It says you did this.
Someone asked somebody, "How are you married for 60 years?"
Oh, okay.
So the man said, "Because I always get the last word." Says, "Yeah. Yes, dear." So, and it works. But that's a unity beyond differences, right? That's sort of submitting. I say, okay, I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to have an opinion. I'm not going to stand what I think here. Or initially you see eye to eye and then things run smoothly. But such a relationship will not endure when there's bumps in the road. When there are differences, and the more stark they are, but even if not, they won't endure in the differences. The differences will not come together. So the ultimate is really a unity with the differences. Now, how do we get a unity with the differences? So again, before we go to the test, so there are several layers to this, but the first thing is to recognize that everybody and really everything has a quality, has an advantage, has something to contribute. And not just that they have something to contribute, but they have something to contribute that I don't have. So the example used in Jewish literature would be the human body. Okay, so you have extremes between the head, the brain, and the foot. They're opposites. What are the opposites? Not just in talent, in quality, in depth, and whatever you want. The brain, the human mind, the intelligence, even the foot depends on the brain, not just for it to, it's the epicenter of the whole body, but to train it and so on, to guide it, and the brain feels the pain of the foot. And the foot is just whatever. It's bone and flesh and whatever. It's just it's sort of like a robot to a puppeteer But at the same time, the foot has something the brain doesn't have: the ability to move, right? So the brain recognizes. Okay, it doesn't go through this whole but that's the harmony of the body, where every part of the body has its unique gift. And by everything contributing together is when you get a healthy human body. Otherwise, you can work around it, but you're limited, right? So if you look at society, you look at human beings as a body, it's the same idea. Every single person, whether you're going to look at them as the foot of the social status or the head of the social status, it's irrelevant. In some way, everybody is a head. In some way, everybody is the one that's the leader, that has what to contribute, their unique thing. And so if a person is able to recognize that in a relationship, to do that, you really need to be humble, to recognize that you're not perfect, that you have gifts, but you also have limitations. And if you recognize that you have gifts and you also have limitations, you can then allow room that someone else has other gifts, although they might also have limitations. And if you want to go deeper, every gift has its own limitations. Every coin has the flip side of the same coin. And so my gift has an advantage, but because of that, I also have a disadvantage. And the disadvantage comes precisely because of the gift sometimes. So when you recognize that, then actually you embrace the differences. So the individuality becomes a cause of celebration, a cause for unity, not a cause for divisiveness. Okay, so that would be the first thing. So let's see that in the mitzvah of Sukkot. That's how I started this whole thing. So you can.
Kids get up. Thank you.
So the first source on the sheet you have from Leviticus, and you shall take for yourself on the first day the fruit of the hadar tree, date palm fronds, a branch of a braided tree, and willows of the brook. In Sukkot you shall dwell for 7 days. All citizens of Israel shall dwell in Sukkot. So on the second part of this repetition of the verse, in Sukkot you shall dwell for 7 days. All citizens of Israel shall dwell in Sukkot. The Talmud says it is fitting that all Israel should dwell in a single sukkah. In other words, the nature of a dwelling place is that in the same space, it can encompass all different levels of society. In the same space, you have young and old, rich and poor, smart and ignorant. So the idea of celebrating in a hut, which is really the only mitzvah that we have in Judaism, that you're totally engulfed in the mitzvah. You're totally surrounded by the mitzvah. Every mitzvah is really one part of your body is involved, another part of your body is involved. Even the talit that we wrap ourselves in also just really wraps the upper part of our body. But a mitzvah that you're fully, there's one more, which is the mikvah, which you're fully, but the only other one that's really across the board, not only when there's impurities, but everyone and every year has to celebrate, is this idea of the sukkah. Because what's the objective is the sense of unity, that everybody should come together in the sukkah. And then we have the first part, which is the 4 species. So there's a midrashic teaching on the 4 species. What is the meaning of the 4 species? Which is fascinating. The mitzvah, this is number 3 on the sheet. The mitzvah, which means the scriptural command of the lulav and etrog, symbolizes the intrinsic unity of the Jewish people. The fulfillment of this mitzvah requires us to hold together either fruit or branches from 4 different species of the trees. One is the date palm, so it's a branch from a date tree, palm tree, before the leaves open up. So when it sort of still looks like a stick. Then you take branches of a myrtle. Okay, you take 3 branches of a myrtle, which it has a very good smell. It's used by some of the people at the conclusion of Shabbat. When we make the Havdalah service, we smell something, some spice. So many people in Sephardic communities primarily, they use this myrtle branch as that good smelling spice. Then we take branches of a willow tree, and then we take a citron fruit called an etrog, not an orange and not a lemon, but it's in the same family. It grows in Italy primarily. Now they sort of transported it to Israel, but it's called an etrog. Okay, what is the symbol? What's the symbol of these four species? So the Midrash says the following: the four kinds represent four spiritual classes within the community. The etrog, a citrus fruit, which has both a delicious taste and a delightful aroma. So you have smell and taste. This represents the perfect individual, one who is both knowledgeable in Torah, meaning academically great, and replete with good deeds. So they're in action, they're great, as well as in mind, they're great. Sort of taste represents the mind, and smell represents the action. Now is not the time to get in exactly why that is. The lulav, which we said earlier, is a branch from the date tree, who's right. So dates, the tree, have taste but no smell. So this personifies the learned. Remember, taste was the learned, but deed deficient individual, person that's more focused on the academia and less engaged. Then we move on to the third category, the hadas, which we said is the myrtle. That has a delightful scent, but lack of taste. Describe the active. Remember, scent is the active, but ignorant individual. There's no taste. And finally, the tasteless, senseless arava, which is the myrtle, represents a person who neither studies nor observes mitzvot. So you have all four categories of people. Now, what is the objective of the mitzvah? If you only have one of these, you can't do the mitzvah. You can't make the blessing and do the mitzvah. You need to gather all four. If one of them is missing, you can't do the mitzvah. So in other words, what's the objective of the mitzvah? It's the unification of all classes of society. Only when we come together, not despite our differences, but with our differences, we need each species individually. Only then does it become a mitzvah. Only then can we make the blessing on it. So here we have the second mitzvah of this holiday of unity, which is not a unity beyond the fragments of society, but it's actually a unity by gathering all the fragments of society together. And what's fascinating is it's not just that there are four different species individually, but actually each one individually of these four represents unity.
Excuse me,
Yes,
I can't hear you while this plate is being passed around. Can we not do that?
no problem at all.
Couldn't be
Just leave it
closer.
right there.
Just
Couldn't be closer.
Leave
She
it
got a
right
hearing
there
aid.
and let everybody
no,
do
no.
it.
I
Thank
have.
you.
They say a story. They say a story. A joke. Yeah, a joke I can say.
Please.
In the
It's like it's time to leave.
in the Orthodox community, when you make an appeal on Shabbat, it's not such a good opportune time because nobody has money on Shabbat. So therefore, you make the appeal, but the time Sunday comes, people forget about it. So when you finally have a weekday opportunity to make the appeal, they'll jump at that opportunity. So they say that one time a rabbi got up on the bima on a weekday and he made his appeal, and then he said like this: the basket is coming around, the chariot box is coming around. I'm asking everybody to take their wallets out. Okay, people comply. And I'm asking everybody to take out one single dollar bill out of your wallet. Okay, that's manageable. And now the basket will come around, and I ask everybody, drop your wallets in and keep the dollar. So the only other way to get around it is if you leave your wallets here. Okay, but on a serious note, going back, so each one of these four species represents the unity. And what we'll find is that it actually grows on differences, which means what actually brings the particular fruit to its ripe state, to the state that you can actually use it for the mitzvah, it necessitates different seasons. It necessitates differences in order to get to where it needs to get to. So let's see it inside number 4. The concept of unity is so central to this mitzvah that it is reflected not only in the requirement of taking,
Sorry.
not only, it's okay, you can leave it, it's fine. Not only in the requirement of taking 4 species, Marty, leave it.
Really?
Not only in the requirement of taking all 4 species together, but also in the characteristics of the individual components of this mitzvah. And it goes through each one of the 4, how you see there's unity in each one of these species. So if we take the date branch, so normally you go to Florida, you see California, right? You have the palm trees. So usually what you see is the branches are all spread wide open, right? But they grow on the top of the tree, they grow like a stick. All the branches are actually tied together. So in this mitzvah, you need to take the branch before it opens up. The moment it begins to open, you can't use it anymore for the mitzvah. So you see that in this mitzvah itself, in addition to being the representative of academia, of taste without smell, but there's unity in this thing itself, that all branches have to be united, have to still be bond together. The same thing is when you go to the myrtle branch. So there are different species of myrtle. The one that's permissible for the mitzvah is that has 3 leaves coming out of the same, I don't know what you call it, the same base, yeah. So in many branches, you have leaves all over. This particular hadas, this myrtle, all 3 leaves, this sort of like, layer after layer after layer, have to come out of the same, had to sprout out from the same point. Again, the idea of unity, all 3 together the same. When we talk about what? When we talk about the willow, so the willow, if you know, the willow tree looks like sort of like a crying tree almost, right? But the way these branches grow, they grow very dense together. So again, the dense of many branches growing together. And when you come to the citrus fruit, the etrog, it's unique. It takes a full year for this fruit to be on the tree, to get to its ripe state. So most other fruits are certain seasonal fruits. I don't know if this is the only one, but at least this one is one that has to experience all 4 seasons to become ripe, and then we can use it for the mitzvah. So it's not just that it tolerates and it's able to survive all 4 seasons, but it necessitates all the 4 different seasons and what they represent, and that together builds this fruit into a ripe fruit. So again, they all represent unity individually. You bring them together, but the unity that it represents is not only, okay, I'll accept you with your differences. It's that our unity, our relationship grows because our differences, because we each recognize that we have what to contribute. We all have gifts to contribute, and therefore, when we bring it all to the table, that actually creates a beautiful relationship. But that's still not enough. That's level number 2 in unity. Briefly, I'll go to level number 3, and that is that ultimately, if you think about what I just said, you should challenge me, because I challenged you before and said that the flawed objective was that it's selfish. Okay? This, in a way, is also selfish. In other words, I'll accept your differences because we all contribute to each other, and then therefore we all create one human body. If it's about what you contribute, because I feel that I'm lacking, and therefore I need your gifts, and you feel that you're lacking, and therefore you need my gifts, we all have what to contribute, then ultimately there is a selfish element to this relationship, right? So the ultimate is actually to be able to connect with the other person, not because what they contribute to me, but really to what they contribute to the cause. And let me explain what I mean by that. Everybody has a purpose in life. Everybody, even the person that you think is irredeemable. If God created them, they're not by mistake. And the Talmud actually says that just like no 2 facial features are the same, you're never going to get, even identical twins have slight differences. No 2 minds are the same. And the reason why God created us different is because every human being has their uniqueness, and therefore, based on that uniqueness, they have the unique mission in life. that nobody else can fulfill but them. So our strengths and our weaknesses are both important for what that particular mission in life is. So therefore, when you recognize that in what I see the other person as a polar opposite to me, and what I see the other person as, I can't wrap my mind around the way they think or the way they behave, or that's their uniqueness. And not just that their uniqueness can add something to me, but their uniqueness has a purpose. And therefore, when you recognize that we're all living for a larger purpose, think of the selflessness. You're living for something greater than ourselves. You're living for a larger purpose. And each one of us should be motivated to do what we do and interact in the way we act to serve that purpose. If you recognize that you have a purpose, you recognize the other person has a purpose. Therefore, you want to help and facilitate and enable the other person to achieve the maximum of their purpose.
Even if it's bad?
No, obviously, people, you don't have to love bad.
Okay.
We're talking about loving a person. That's a very separate discussion. Once if somebody did bad, so then you have to be able to differentiate between the person and the choices. So we're not talking about now the negative choice. You're not embracing the choice, but you're embracing the person. Okay, well, that's a good question, which we don't have now time to really get into that. But now let's just talk about, again, not someone hurt someone or did something negative, but many times what we don't like in the other person is just their personality, their style, the way they live, and the way they talk, and the way they think. So we're talking, let's make it simpler. So we're talking about it. When you recognize that they have a gift as well, in their own way, they're ahead, they're a leader. And therefore, the objective of the relationship in the bitul way, in the selflessness way, is to really be there to help them be their best. And when you're able to see that, when you're able to be there so that they can be their best, their unique best, not to reflect my best and not to be a replica of my best, then you can celebrate their unique difference. And then all of a sudden, their uniqueness becomes part of the harmony of the relationship and not the divisiveness of the relationship. So if you think about parent-child, this is the easiest model to model that, although really it has a limitation because parent-child,
Sorry.
the parent-child relationship is inborn. So obviously it's not fair to replicate that, but I don't have time to get into that actually, but actually there's a depth to relationship by choice over relationship by blood. But there's it's a much deeper relationship actually in a way, but let's use parent-child relationship, right? So there's the helicopter parent, as we call them, right? And then you allow the child independence, right? Now, the helicopter parent is an example, the kind parent. They think they're doing the right thing. How could I allow my child to fail? But really, it's not how could I allow my child to fail. I really create my child in my image.
Exactly.
It's about me. I want them to be the way I understand, the way I want them to live my lifestyle. Independence is recognizing that they're not me. Yes, they have part of my DNA, yes, but they're really an individual and they have their own unique purpose in life. And I, as a parent, in a healthy way and in stages, I'm here to support them in their individuality. Okay, so then they can be polar opposites from me, but I can appreciate them. I can celebrate them. I can help. That's a healthy relationship. That's a relationship with our differences. I don't ignore the differences. I'm not walking on eggshells, only in the teenage years, but I'm not walking on eggshells. I recognize it, I embrace it, I celebrate it, and it's a deeper relationship. You accept me for who I am, I feel accepted, I feel wanted, I feel recognized, and so on. And the same is the other way. And the same thing is in a marriage, and the same thing is in work, and the same is really to be there to enable the other to be their best. And when you have that, then you have the four species coming together. Then you have the differences together creating that real sense, that deeper sense of unity. So when we think about relationship, if we think about the objective, what am I trying to get to, then we can measure how am I faring in the relationship. Am I living up to that goal, or am I getting stuck along the way? And then you just have to reorient. Just saying it's so easy, but I'm saying reorient again. What's the objective, and then does this fit that objective? Does that support that objective, and so on? So I think I'll stop over here. Although what you brought up is a good discussion in itself. That's just, yeah.
It's not, as I listen to you speak, it's not an accident, I don't think, that so many of the modern formal psychological thinkers and contributors were Jewish. The background kind of absorption, I suspect, of some of the culture, if not all of the Talmudic teachings that you've been going into, contribute to Alfred Adler and contribute to more modern let's see.
Rogers.
Well, Rogers wasn't Jewish.
That's okay.
No, but I'm saying that's
It's
some
in
of,
the air.
some of the big Abraham Maslow.
Freud.
Yeah, but Freud's approach was
Freud didn't want to give credit to Judy.
Freud's approach
But
was
Viktor Frankl, for
Viktor
example,
Frankl, Martin Buber are all.
Viktor Frankl used to put on tefillin every day. You know that?
Yeah, I do actually. But I mean, there's a lot in, even in the three levels you just described.
There's a lot to talk about. Yes.
Maslow's survival needs, being needs, and actualizing needs are not exactly the same thing, but they're sort of, so that I see some convergence on this. Anyway, it's very interesting.
I wish we had time to talk about it because
I
I
would say that my
disagree about
grandchildren are
unity.
the best version of
Couples come
themselves.
together for help.
And my children too.
Yeah,
are on the
their
same.
main thing